About a week ago, you may have heard the maintainer of the libxml2 project stepping down, remove myself as maintainer, updating a readme from saying, "This is open source software written by hobbyists, maintained by a single volunteer, badly tested, written in a memory unsafe language, and full of security bugs. It is foolish to use this software to process untrusted data. As such, we treat security issues like any other bug. Each security report you receive will be made public immediately and won't be prioritized." Updating to now saying, or I guess now before the next update, this project is unmaintained and has known security issues linking out to this issue right here. It is foolish to use this software to process untrusted data. And that issue is just a general tracking issue for things going wrong in the project. And this is something that the maintainer of the project had written. They say, "Why are people using this? Stop relying on this. I am a single guy. I don't have a team to deal with your security issues. Why are you using this library?" The issue was opened back in 2022, and right down the bottom here, Michael Catanzaro of the GNOME project says, "Do you want a CVE for this?" A CVE is certainly not going to fix the problem, but it would be, I guess, a number to track that the problem is happening. No, there are dozens of issues with algorithmic complexity, both fixed and open. It will cause hours of additional work if people suddenly start requesting CVE IDs. libxml2 has never been safe to use with untrusted input. It doesn't help to pretend otherwise. At this point, the maintainer was basically saying, "I don't understand why people keep relying on this library. It is not in a state to rely on." Now, following all of this going on, a new maintainer took over the project and updated the README once again. The message tries to be positive, promoting collaboration instead of conflict. The idea is to make it clear that collaboration is welcome, and the way to go is to do it yourself instead of asking maintainers to do it for you. So there's just this message here, okay, so it's like remove the bit about, oh, this is unmaintained, now saying, oh, it actually is maintained. It is still not recommended to process untrusted data with it, and the software is provided as is. Now with a bit down the bottom saying, the main rule is to be kind. Do not pressure developers to fix CVE or to work on a functionality that you need, because that won't work. This is a community project. Developers will work in the issues that they consider interesting when they want. All contributions are welcome, so if something's important for you, you can always get involved. Implement it yourself and be part of the open source community. All that stuff sounds nice and sounds great. Until this news happened, maybe even until you saw this video, you may not have even known that libxml2 was a thing that existed, because it's not something that you as a user is going to interact with, but it is something that a lot of the applications that you probably use in some way. Basically, it is a parser for XML. Now, you might not really know much about XML, but what's important to remember is this is a really common way to handle data. Just on Arch Linux, it is required by 410 packages. Some of them you may know. For example, AppStream, Blender, Chromium, ClamAV, basically every version of Electron, Emacs, FFmpeg, a lot of the GNOME suite, LibreOffice, MariaDB, Postgres, VirtualBox, Wireshark. And that's just random things I noticed on the list. There is a whole bunch of other things that also require it, let alone things that rely on these things that also basically have it as a dependency, just as a transitive dependency rather than a direct one. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this isn't specifically because of libxml2. It's not because it was maintained and then it wasn't maintained and now it is maintained again. It's because it's a project like hundreds of others where one guy stepping down kills the project. But not just that. There is a lot of projects like that. A project that is a core infrastructure project where if one guy steps down, it kills the project, where there is hundreds upon hundreds of projects that all rely on this one little library, and basically one person works on it. libxml2 might be the most recent case, but it is certainly not a unique phenomenon. And this is a problem that has been brewing for a very, very long time. Basically, just replace any mention of libxml2 with a ton of other projects, and you're going to notice that a lot of this sounds really, really similar. So this is an issue that was made about 7 months ago, triaging security issues reported by third parties. I have to spend several hours each week dealing with security issues reported by third parties. Most of these issues aren't critical, but it's still a lot of work. In the long term, this is unsustainable for an unpaid volunteer like me. I'm thinking about some changes that allow me to continue working on libxml2. The basic idea is to treat security issues just like any other bug. They will be made public immediately and fixed whenever maintainers have any time. There will be no deadlines. This policy will probably make some downstream users nervous, but maybe it encourages them to contribute a little more. The more I think about it, the more I realize that this is the only way forward. I've been doing this long enough to know that most secrecy around security issues is just theater. All the best practices like open SSF scorecards are just an attempt by big tech companies to guilt trip open source software maintainers to make them work for free. My one-man company recently tried to become an open SSF member. You have to become a Linux Foundation member first, which costs at least $10,000 a year. These organizations are very exclusive clubs and anything but open. It's about time to call them and their backers out. In the long run, putting such demands on open source software maintainers without compensating them is detrimental. I just stepped down as the libxslt maintainer, and it's unlikely this project will ever be maintained again. It's even more unlikely with Google Project Zero, the best white hat security researchers money can buy, breathing down the necks of volunteers. Now, after being tagged, Michael Catanzaro stepped in to try and somewhat calm the situation down. I agree that reducing the disclosure deadline for libxml2 vulnerabilities might be strategic, at least for the time being, but there is a cost. Downstream vendors might stop reporting bugs here, which is probably worse than the status quo. Considering the maintainer just really doesn't want to deal with them, it kind of is the status quo in many ways. If you are burning out, then one option worth considering is to reduce your focus, e.g. you might consider focusing on triaging issue reports, reviewing merge requests, and optimistically, mentoring new maintainers rather than trying to fix security issues yourself. And thirdly, I'm very grateful to Project Zero and other vulnerability research groups for reporting issues. Their reports are invariably excellent, and we should encourage them to continue reporting vulnerabilities as quickly as they can find them. Warning us that problems exist is not a problem. That said, Project Zero has notably reported zero security vulnerabilities in libxml2 since the start of this year, and this last one is just about some other person that was listed as a maintainer, but wasn't really doing any sort of maintainership. The point is that libxml2 never had the quality to be used in mainstream browsers or operating systems to begin with. It all started when Apple made libxml2 a core component of all their OSs. Then Google followed suit, and now even Microsoft is using libxml2 in their OS outside of Edge. This should have never happened. Originally, it was kind of a growth hack, but now these companies make billions of profits and refuse to pay back their technical debt, either by switching to better solutions, developing their own, or by trying to improve libxml2. The behavior of these companies is irresponsible, even if they claim otherwise. They don't care about the security and privacy of their users, they only try to fix symptoms. Well, I don't think it's a controversial take that Microsoft doesn't care about the privacy of their users. I think that's a pretty mainstream take. I'm not playing part in this game anymore. It would be better for the health of this project if these companies stopped using it. I'm thinking of adding the following disclaimer. So this is the thing where it's like, oh, this is unsafe and it's full of bugs and you shouldn't use it. The thing which has since been modified in a newer version of the README. Most core parts of libxml2 should be covered by Google's or other companies' bug bounty programs already. The rest of the code isn't as security critical. I don't care if I don't receive security reports as early as possible. Most issues should be easily fixable by anyone. As soon as a patch is available, my job is done. I won't embargo security issues until a release is made. The only time you really want an embargo are non-trivial issues that take longer to fix. I can live with that risk. Regarding Michael's bullet points, I'd love to mentor new maintainers, but there aren't any candidates. And this isn't just a problem in this project. I've talked to people involved in things like cups, for example, and Till Campetter's been around in the project for a long time, but there's not anywhere near as much interest in working on a low-level, really just kind of in many ways, I don't mean boring as in it's not fun to work on, but boring as in it's not some revolutionary new thing. It's kind of just the glue that fits everything together. A lot of people that want to work on something gravitate more towards the things where they can like make an impact that people see. The desktops, desktop applications, even the kernel in some ways. The kind of like glue that makes the system fit together, it needs to be there, but it also needs a special kind of person that finds that work sort of enjoyable and engaging. And more recently, as this issue from 3 months ago switched the license to GPL v3. This is one of those things you do where you're effectively saying, this library is dead. Yes, you can use a GPL v3 library, but it severely limits the environments it can be used in. There is a very good reason why most libraries are something like MIT, some form of BSD, maybe Apache, other permissive licenses. It's because people want their libraries to be used, right? Going GPL v3 is effectively the same as just stepping down as maintainer. Basically, his idea is we can make any future contributions GPL v3, and then if people want to have a version of it that they can actually use, then you basically have like a paid commercial license. And that is something you can do and has worked for some things in the past. What's a lot more likely, though, is any of the companies that rely on it would actually finally get their act together and say, okay, well, we actually don't want to pay you, now we're going to fork it. It's not a guarantee. Some of them might just actually pay for it, but more than likely this is what it would actually cause a fork. Because whilst there might not be open source developers that want to maintain a library like this, I can guarantee you that if Google wanted to pay to have this maintained, they could very easily do that. They choose not to do it, but that's a very solvable problem. They've got the disposable income for that. Apple and all these other companies that rely on it could very easily solve that if they really wanted to. They just don't want to. And Michael Catanzaro basically explained all of this in considerably more words and gives some examples of it happening in the past and all that good stuff. And also says, and this caused a bit of drama a little bit later, good news is several Google and Apple engineers have volunteered to help with libxml2 and libxslt. That is really hard to say. Security issues. This actually didn't happen, apparently. They never did so. Despite your efforts to sabotage libxml2 users, especially web browsers, by disclosing all vulnerabilities immediately rather than allowing them the industry standard 90-day disclosure deadline used by in all other GNOME projects. I do like how little Nick, the maintainer, actually cares at this point. Like, Michael's basically saying, hey, you're being an ass here, why are you doing this? And he's just like, yeah, thanks for the reply. I'm weighing my options here. I'm just like, at this point, he was already willing to quit the project, he just hadn't done so yet. He didn't care what anybody else had to say anymore. And even though the official announcement was only about a week ago, he actually stepped down about 2 months ago. Somebody came along and was like, oh, I can help maintain it. And he's like, yeah. He's like, I don't, just do it. Literally do whatever you want. I actually don't care anymore. Now he does have the maintainer tag because things changed over. But at that point in time, it was just someone who was like, yeah, I don't even care anymore about this project. And again, with how long he'd been doing it and how little support he'd been getting from it, I understand why he just didn't care anymore. I'll leave this whole thread linked down below because shortly after this, Jordan Petridis came in to, like, create problems. There was that point about how the maintainer was trying to sabotage the project, and he went on some, like, big rant about how you shouldn't treat maintainers like this, and all this normal stuff. I'm not going to get into that here. Again, I'll just leave it linked down below. This is a problem that a lot of the FOSS world has. There is a lot of these random little projects that tons of people rely on that nobody knows exists until something goes really, really badly. I think projects like XZUtils and the Geotan situation, where a probably state-backed actor tried to inject a backdoor into XZUtils, and basically every single distro makes use of XZUtils. Thankfully, it was caught before it actually made its way into any stable releases, so it wasn't actually a problem. But that could have been incredibly bad. And in that case, there was a maintainer, and they stepped down for a while. Someone else came in, that being the Geotan person, and because it seemed like they were a, good maintainer, they were just given full control over the project, and, well, there was no one else there to keep them in check. They were the maintainer at that point, and things got bad. Other times, things go relatively well. Again, like with Tilcampata and the open printing organization, the CUPS project, which is the foundation of printing on Linux. For a long time, he worked at Canonical. Now he has funding from the Sovereign Tech Fund, and now he's working on taking sponsors from the Linux Foundation. So that project's in pretty good hands. But at least in both these cases, you know that something is happening. You at least know the project exists. But there are so many other of these cases where it's one of these fundamental pillars. It's not an FFmpeg, it's not a curl, it's not something you know about, but it's still just as important, and then one day, the dev just disappears. 6 months later, someone realizes the security problem, and there's no one around to fix it anymore, even though tons of companies rely on it, even though there is billions and billions of dollars all tied up in this library working. None of the companies that make use of it even acknowledge its existence. And frankly, I don't know how to solve this problem, because if you're a very user-facing project, like KDE, for example, okay? I've talked a lot about the KDE funding. I'll bring up the previous donations page. If you're KDE, solving the funding problem is really, really easy. All you do is you go and ask people to fund the project, and then they give you a shitload of money, because KDE is the best Linux desktop environment, and people are willing to fund it. But if you're something low level, you can't just, you can add something to the README, maybe something into the docs, but that's about as far as you can go. You can't just put a notification in front of everyone. Like, that's just not a thing that you're capable of doing, being a low-level library. And if you put a call to action in your function docs, devs who are trying to go and, know what a function does, that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for, what arguments a function takes, or what, different functions are going to be doing. I'm happy that there are organizations like the Sovereign Tech Fund or Sovereign Tech Agency, whatever name they're going by now, that are willing to fund these low-level projects. But for all of these important projects that we do hear about getting funding, there's probably 100 others that you've never heard about that maybe they've got 3 GitHub sponsors. Even that's a lot of GitHub sponsors that you have just no idea about, but you have running in a system, and so do millions of other people. Honestly, if anyone has a solution to the open source funding problem, I'd love to hear it. I think everybody would love to hear it, because this has been something people have been trying to solve basically forever, and there's more funding than there has been at some points, but there's still so many important projects that nobody knows about. I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I don't think anybody has a good answer at all, but maybe you do. I'd love to hear it. So if you like the video, go like the video, go subscribe as well, and if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon Scribes Daily Bearer Pay linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and I don't know, man. I don't know.